In my family, the heavier your daughter, the higher her bride price, so every girl at 13 got sent to the fattening house where we had to gain 200 pounds in 2 years or face punishment. I found my grandmother's hidden death book listing 47 girls who died from the process, along with their sale prices and profit margins. When I started teaching the other girls chemistry, so we could fake our weight gain with salt water and hidden foam padding, everything began to unravel. In my family, skinny daughters were worthless, and fat daughters were currency. The heavier you were, the higher your bride price. Every girl at 13 got sent to the fattening house for a minimum of 2 years, where gaining weight wasn't a suggestion, it was survival. I grew up watching my older cousins disappear into that house, walking on their own 2 feet and wheeled out in chairs, too heavy to stand. My cousin Amara went in at 115 pounds and came out at 340. She was married within a week to a man who paid extra for her stretch marks. They called them beauty lines, but I saw how she gasped for air walking to her own wedding. The process was simple. 6 meals a day, each one monitored by the house mothers. You sat in a circle while they ladled bowls of crushed millet mixed with butter, sugar, and camel milk down your throat. If you threw up, they'd make you eat the vomit. Waste nothing, gain everything, my aunt would say cheerfully while girls cried into their bowls. 4,000 calories per meal, minimum. They had tricks to make you hungrier, salt baths that made you retain water, medications that increased appetite. Exercise was forbidden, except for throat stretches to help you swallow faster. My sister Kayla tried doing squats in secret. They caught her and force-fed her until her stomach nearly ruptured. As punishment, she had to eat standing up for a month. I was 11 when I found the death book, hidden in my grandmother's closet while looking for Eid money. Names and weights filled 3 notebooks. Amara, age 22, heart failure, 389 pounds. Fatu, age 19, diabetes coma, 412 pounds. Mariama, age 24, stroke, 445 pounds. Page after page of girls who never made it to 30. The weights next to their names weren't just numbers, they were their sale prices. But what really made me sick was the profit column. Beside each death, my grandmother had calculated how much money the family made from their bride price minus funeral costs. Fatu's death netted the family $85,000. Her husband kept the dowry even though she only lived 4 months after the wedding. That's when I started planning. I was smart about it. Told everyone I was starting a traditional cooking circle for younger girls to prepare them for the fattening house. We met every Thursday in my uncle's garage teaching recipes, but what I really taught was chemistry. The exact amount of salt to retain 20 pounds of water weight for weigh-ins, how to make fake fat suits from layered fabric and memory foam, ways to trigger temporary bloating that would disappear after measurements. We got creative as hell. Practiced eating competitions where girls learned to hide food in their cheeks and spit it out later. Developed a system of herbal teas that suppressed appetite while making your face look puffy. Made our own weight gain shakes that were actually just protein powder and laxatives. The house mothers thought we were so dedicated. My genius move was suggesting we document our journey for marriage advertisements. We took photos but learned exactly which angles and clothing made you look 50 pounds heavier. Bought a broken scale that added 80 pounds and swapped it during official weigh-ins. By the time I turned 13 and entered the house myself, I had a network of 15 girls all trained in the art of fake fattening. We shared clothes that had hidden weights sewn into the hems, learned to walk slow and breathe heavy like we were carrying extra weight, perfected the arm positions that made our pictures look massive. The house mothers praised us constantly. "Look how well Aaliyah gains," they'd say as I stepped on the rigged scale. We became their star students while secretly flushing thousands of calories down the toilet every night. Some girls learned to throw up silently. Others developed jaw techniques that made swallowing look real while keeping food in their cheeks. We turned survival into an art form. Everything fell apart at my cousin Decca's marriage viewing. She was supposed to be 300 pounds after 2 years in the house. The buyers were expecting a massive bride. But when her fake fat suit shifted during the clothing removal ceremony, everyone saw she was maybe 130 pounds. The room exploded. The groom's family demanded their money back, accused us of theft. My uncle grabbed Decca by the hair, screaming about honor. But then something beautiful happened. 23 girls stood up in unison and started peeling off their own fat suits. Pounds of hidden weights hit the floor with thuds that sounded like thunder. I pulled out my phone and showed everyone the death book photos I'd taken. 3 notebooks worth of girls who'd been culled by kindness, fed to death for profit. While the families started screaming about tradition and shame, someone had already called the police. The chaos erupted like a dam breaking. Mothers shrieked, fathers roared, and the groom's family pushed through the crowd demanding answers. My grandmother's face turned purple as she watched her carefully constructed empire crumble with each thud of discarded weights hitting the floor. I kept my phone raised high, scrolling through photo after photo of the death records. The police officers who'd just arrived stood frozen at the entrance, trying to process the scene of dozens of young women stripping off layers of padding while families screamed about honor and theft. My mother grabbed my wrist, trying to wrestle the phone away. Her nails dug into my skin as we struggled, but I'd been preparing for this moment for 2 years. I twisted free and back toward the police officers, still displaying the evidence. The lead officer, a woman with graying temples, took one look at the death records on my screen and immediately called for backup. She began separating the girls from their families, creating a protective barrier while more officers arrived. My grandmother pushed through the crowd, her cane striking the floor with sharp cracks. She reached for Decca, who was still standing in her undergarments after removing the fat suit, but 3 girls immediately surrounded my cousin, linking arms to shield her. The house mothers arrived next, summoned by frantic phone calls. They surveyed the scene with horror, watching their star pupils reveal themselves as normal weight teenagers. One of them fainted when she saw the scale we'd rigged sitting in the corner, its modified mechanism exposed. The police spent hours taking statements. Each girl told her story hallway while family members paced outside, some shouting threats through the windows. My uncle tried to storm back in twice before officers restrained him. As dawn broke, 23 families had daughters who'd exposed the deception. Some parents wept with relief when they saw their daughters' real bodies. Others raged about lost bride prices and ruined reputations. The divide cut through bloodlines like a blade. The aftermath moved quickly. Within days, half the families had withdrawn their daughters from our group, terrified of association with the scandal. My own parents locked me in my room, taking shifts to ensure I couldn't escape or communicate with the other girls. My grandmother held emergency meetings with the other matriarchs. Through the thin walls, I heard them strategizing about damage control. They discussed moving the fattening house to a different location, implementing stricter surveillance, even hiring guards to prevent future rebellions. But we'd anticipated this. Before the wedding viewing, I'd uploaded copies of the death records to multiple cloud accounts and shared access with trusted allies. Even locked in my room, I knew the evidence was spreading beyond our family's ability to contain it. My sister Kala became their first target for re-education. They forced her back into the fattening house, this time with a dedicated monitor who watched her swallow every bite. But Kyla had learned our techniques well. She could hold food in her cheeks for hours, slowly letting it dissolve rather than swallowing. The house mothers grew desperate. They instituted new rules requiring girls to open their mouths after each bite, checking under tongues and in cheek pouches. They weighed girls before and after bathroom visits. They installed cameras in the dormitories. Still, the resistance adapted. Girls learned to trigger vomiting through pressure points. They discovered that certain spice combinations could cause temporary inflammation that mimicked weight gain. They shared techniques through coded songs during mandatory rest periods. 3 weeks after the wedding viewing, Amina became the first to break. The pressure from her family, combined with threats to her younger sisters, proved too much. She appeared at my window one night, tears streaming down her face, and told me she was going to comply with the fattening. Her betrayal stung, but I understood. Not everyone could endure their mother's tears or their father's rage indefinitely. We'd known from the beginning that some would fall away when the cost became real. The police investigation moved slowly. Officers interviewed each family, but many girls recanted their statements under pressure. Parents claimed the death records were fabricated, that the girls had been manipulated by modern influences. The physical evidence of the modified scale helped, but wasn't enough for immediate action. My aunt arrived at our house with a proposal. If I publicly apologized and submitted to the fattening house, they would reduce my required time to 6 months. She painted it as mercy, a chance to restore family honor with minimal sacrifice. I refused. That night, they moved me to my grandmother's compound where surveillance was tighter. No phones, no visitors, no contact with the outside world. They believed isolation would break my resolve, but they underestimated the bonds we'd forged. Even separated, the girls found ways to communicate. Laundry lines became message systems. Kitchen servants carried whispers between houses. What makes me wonder is how these young girls managed to create such an elaborate system right under everyone's noses. The broken scale, the fake fat suits, teaching chemistry in a cooking circle. Children too young to understand became unwitting couriers. The first major victory came through Fatima's courage. Despite family threats, she maintained her testimony to the police. She provided detailed accounts of the force feeding, the punishments for resistance, the medical complications she'd witnessed. Her steadfastness inspired 3 others to reinforce their own statements. The investigation expanded. Health officials arrived to inspect the fattening house, documenting the dangerous feeding schedules and lack of medical oversight. They found girls with untreated diabetes, hypertension, and mobility issues from rapid weight gain. My grandmother's response was swift and ruthless. She organized the matriarchs to create a unified front, claiming cultural persecution. They hired lawyers to challenge any potential charges, arguing that traditional practices were protected, but cracks appeared in their alliance. Some mothers, seeing the death records and health reports, began questioning whether tradition was worth their daughters' lives. Whispered conversations in kitchens and markets revealed growing doubts. The turning point came when Mariama's mother found her daughter's hidden journal. In it, Mariama had documented every forced feeding, every punishment, every night she'd cried herself to sleep with stomach pains. Her mother read it and wept for hours. That evening, Mariama's mother arrived at the police station with the journal and her own testimony. She revealed the profit system, the bride price negotiations, the pressure on mothers to produce valuable daughters. Her betrayal of the matriarch sent shockwaves through our community. My grandmother convened an emergency meeting. Through the window, I watched cars arrive throughout the night. The arguing lasted until dawn, voices raised in accusation and defense. Some families wanted to accelerate the fattening schedule before authorities could intervene. Others advocated for negotiation. The moderate faction proposed reforms to make the practice safer, setting weight limits and medical monitoring. But my grandmother and her allies rejected any compromise. They'd built their wealth and status on this system and wouldn't abandon it willingly. As the meeting ended, I saw the community dividing into clear camps. Progressive families began withdrawing their daughters from the fattening house. Traditional hardliners doubled down, moving their operations to more secret locations. My imprisonment continued, but I drew strength from knowing the movement survived without me. Every day brought new reports of girls refusing meals, families questioning tradition, and authorities documenting abuses. The police finally had enough evidence to take formal action. They arrived at the fattening house with health inspectors and social workers. What they found there would become the foundation of a larger investigation. The health inspectors documented conditions that made even the hardened police officers grimace. Girls lay on mattresses soaked with sweat, their ankles swollen from forced inactivity. The feeding logs showed relentless schedules that would have broken professional competitive eaters. Medical charts revealed untreated infections, bed sores, and joint damage damage from rapid weight gain. My grandmother's compound erupted in activity as news of the raid spread. Through my barred window, I watched her lieutenants arrive in succession, their faces grim. The matriarchs had underestimated how thoroughly we documented their system. Every death, every profit calculation, every girl sacrificed for bride prices now lay exposed under official scrutiny. The house mothers attempted damage control, claiming the girls had underlying health conditions unrelated to the fattening process. But the medical evidence painted a clear picture of systematic abuse. Blood work showed dangerous cholesterol levels, liver damage from constant overfeeding, and kidney strain from the salt baths. My isolation became more severe as the investigation intensified. They moved me to an interior room with no windows, only a small ventilation grate near the ceiling. 2 women guarded my door at all times, preventing any communication with the outside world. Meals arrived 3 times daily, carefully portioned to begin my own fattening process. I employed every technique I'd taught the other girls. Food hidden in cheeks, slow dissolution rather than swallowing, triggering my gag reflex through practiced tongue movements. The guards grew frustrated watching me take hours to finish a single bowl of millet porridge. They reported my resistance to my grandmother, who arrived with reinforcements. 4 women held me down while a 5th tried to force a feeding tube down my throat. I thrashed and bit, making the process impossible. They eventually gave up, but not before leaving bruises on my arms and legs from their grip. My grandmother stood watching, her face a mask of cold fury. The compound transformed into a fortress. Guards patrolled the perimeter, preventing any of the rebel girls from approaching. Delivery people were searched, laundry was inspected for hidden messages, and even the youngest children faced interrogation about their activities. My grandmother knew the network still functioned despite our separation. News filtered through despite their precautions. A sympathetic guard whispered updates while pretending to check my room. The police investigation had expanded beyond our district. Health officials from the capital were reviewing similar practices nationwide. Our small rebellion had exposed a system that stretched across regions. Some families panicked and accelerated their daughters' fattening schedules. Reports came of girls being fed around the clock, their protests silenced with sedatives. The traditional hardliners grew desperate as their profit model faced extinction. Marriage negotiations stalled as potential grooms questioned whether they wanted brides who might die within months. My own family fractured under the pressure. My mother visited me late one night, tears streaming down her face. She begged me to comply, to save our family's reputation. She spoke of the shame, the whispers in the market, the way other women turned away when she approached. I remained silent, knowing any response would only fuel her anguish. My father took a different approach. He arrived with photo albums, showing me pictures of successful marriages, plump brides smiling beside their husbands. He explained how the system had worked for generations, how it ensured daughters were valued and cared for. His words rang hollow as I remembered the death records, the profit calculations beside each girl's name. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. My cousin Salma, who'd always been my grandmother's favorite, discovered a second set of books hidden in the compound's old storage building. These records went back 50 years, documenting hundreds of deaths, the evolution of feeding techniques, and correspondence with other families running similar operations. Salma faced an impossible choice: loyalty to the grandmother who'd raised her after her parents died, or justice for the cousins she'd watched disappear into early graves. She chose justice. Under cover of darkness, she photographed every page and smuggled the memory card out through a trusted kitchen worker. The new evidence reached investigators within days. The historical records proved this wasn't tradition, but a calculated business model that had evolved to maximize profits. Letters between matriarchs discussed optimal weight gains, feeding schedules designed to push girls to their limits, and strategies for hiding deaths from authorities. My grandmother's empire began crumbling faster. Several house mothers facing potential criminal charges agreed to cooperate with investigators. They revealed the full extent of the operation: the suppliers who provided appetite stimulants, the doctors who falsified health certificates, the network of families who shared techniques for maximizing bride prices. The compound's atmosphere grew increasingly tense. Guards whispered among themselves, some questioning whether their loyalty was worth potential imprisonment. The cooks began reducing portion sizes, no longer willing to participate in force feeding. Even my grandmother's most trusted allies showed signs of wavering. My imprisonment took a new turn when they decided to break my spirit through isolation. They removed all furniture from my room, leaving only a thin mat on the concrete floor. Meals became erratic, sometimes arriving cold, sometimes not at all. They hoped hunger would make me more compliant when feeding resumed. Instead, the hardship strengthened my resolve. Every discomfort reminded me why we'd started this rebellion. I exercised in secret, maintaining my strength through push-ups and squats in the darkness. I recited the names from the death books like a prayer, keeping their memory alive in my mind. The investigation's scope continued expanding. Journalists began covering the story, though my grandmother's influence kept it from major outlets. Still, whispers spread through social media, coded messages shared between sympathetic families. International health organizations expressed concern about reports emerging from our region. Several girls from our original group managed to escape their family compounds. They fled to sympathetic relatives or sought protection from women's advocacy groups. Each escape story inspired others, creating a slow exodus of girls refusing to accept their fate as fattened brides. My sister Kyla's situation grew desperate. The constant monitoring and force feeding had begun taking its toll. Through our network, I learned she'd gained 40 pounds in 2 months, her body struggling to process the relentless calories. Her ankles had swollen so badly she could barely walk, and she'd developed a persistent cough from the strain on her lungs. Those hidden financial records spanning 50 years just turned this from family tradition into organized crime. Nothing says cultural heritage quite like detailed profit margins next to death tolls. else does it. The house mothers tried presenting her as a success story, but even they couldn't hide her deteriorating health. During a mandatory medical check, a sympathetic nurse documented her condition and leaked the report to investigators. Photos of Kayla's swollen joints and labored breathing became evidence of the practice's dangers. My grandmother made one last attempt to salvage her system. She organized a meeting of all the traditional families, proposing they create their own oversight committee to self-regulate the practice. They would set reasonable weight targets and ensure basic medical monitoring. She presented it as a compromise that preserved tradition while addressing safety concerns. The proposal divided even her supporters. Some saw it as necessary adaptation, while others viewed any change as betrayal of their ancestors. The meeting devolved into bitter arguments, with families accusing each other of weakness or extremism. The unified front my grandmother had maintained for decades finally shattered. Meanwhile, investigators had built a comprehensive case. They documented financial records showing millions in bride price transactions. Medical experts testified about the severe health risks of rapid weight gain. Former house mothers revealed the psychological tactics used to break girls' resistance. The compound's security began breaking down as guards abandoned their posts. Some left quietly in the night, unwilling to be associated with potential criminal charges. Others actively aided the rebellion, smuggling messages and supplies to imprisoned girls. My grandmother's iron control slipped with each defection. I marked my days in isolation by scratching lines on the wall with a loose piece of concrete. 63 days of darkness, hunger, and resistance. My body had grown thin, but my mind remained sharp. I practiced the testimony I would give when finally freed, organizing evidence and experiences into a coherent narrative. The turning point arrived through Mariama's mother's continued courage. She organized a group of progressive mothers to demand their daughters' release from all fattening houses. They arrived at compounds across the district simultaneously, some accompanied by health workers and legal advocates. The coordinated action overwhelmed the traditional family's ability to respond. At my grandmother's compound, the confrontation was fierce. Mothers who'd once been friends faced off across the courtyard, shouting accusations and defenses. Some demanded their daughters immediately, while others insisted tradition must be upheld. The police arrived to maintain order, but their presence alone shifted the power dynamic. My grandmother emerged from her house, leaning heavily on her cane. She surveyed the crowd with contempt, declaring that weak mothers would raise weak daughters. She accused the progressive families of abandoning their culture for modern corruption. Her words, once carrying absolute authority, now sounded desperate. The crowd's response surprised everyone. Several traditional mothers stepped forward, admitting their own daughters had died in the fattening houses. They'd remained silent out of shame and fear, but the mounting evidence had broken their complicity. Each testimony added weight to the investigator's case. My uncle attempted to restore order through intimidation. He grabbed one of the progressive mothers, shaking her while screaming about family honor. But instead of cowering, she stood firm, and other women immediately surrounded her in protection. The physical confrontation he'd intended to end resistance only strengthened it. Inside my dark cell, I heard the commotion but couldn't see what was happening. The guard at my door had abandoned her post, drawn by the drama outside. I pressed my ear against the ventilation grate, straining to understand the shouted words and growing chaos. The standoff continued for hours. Progressive mothers refused to leave without their daughters, while traditional families refused to release them. Police officers tried negotiating a peaceful resolution, but positions had hardened beyond compromise. As darkness fell, temporary camps formed in the courtyard, as mothers prepared for a long siege. That night, something shifted in the compound's atmosphere. The remaining guards whispered urgently among themselves. Cooks prepared final meals with tears in their eyes. Even the most loyal servants sensed the old order crumbling. My grandmother's empire, built on the bodies of fattened girls, faced its final hours. The next morning brought decisive action. Health officials arrived with court orders demanding immediate access to all girls in the compound. They were accompanied by social workers, medical personnel, and a larger police presence. My grandmother's lawyers protested, but their objections were overruled. Room by room, officials documented conditions and freed imprisoned girls. The scenes were heartbreaking as daughters reunited with progressive mothers while traditional families raged against the intervention. Medical teams immediately began assessing the girls' health, finding cases of severe malnutrition among those who'd successfully resisted, alongside dangerous obesity in those who'd been force-fed. When they finally reached my isolation cell, I could barely stand. 64 days of resistance had left me weak but unbroken. The health worker who examined me wept at my condition, documenting the bruises from forced feeding attempts and the deterioration from prolonged isolation. My mother waited outside, her face a battlefield of emotions. Relief at seeing me alive warred with shame at what she'd allowed. I walked past her without speaking, knowing forgiveness would require time and genuine change. My priority was reuniting with the other girls and ensuring our testimony would prevent future generations from suffering. The compound emptied as girls were either reunited with supportive families or placed in protective care. My grandmother watched from her window, her empire dissolving with each departure. The matriarchs who'd built their wealth on this system faced investigation, their assets frozen pending legal proceedings, but our work wasn't finished. The traditional families regrouped, seeking new locations to continue their practices in secret. They spread propaganda about cultural destruction, claiming foreign influence had corrupted their daughters. Some communities rallied to their defense, viewing the investigation as an attack on their identity. We responded by sharing our stories widely. Every girl who'd survived the fattening house had a testimony of abuse, fear, and health destruction. We spoke at community gatherings, to health organizations, to anyone who would listen. The death books became our most powerful evidence, names and weights that couldn't be denied. My sister Kala required months months of medical treatment to recover from her ordeal. The rapid weight gain had damaged her joints and strained her heart. Watching her struggle to walk even short distances reminded us why this fight mattered. She became one of our most powerful speakers, her visible suffering contradicting claims that the practice was harmless tradition. The investigation revealed the practice's economic scope. Millions flowed through bride prices, creating an entire industry around fattening girls. Suppliers, doctors, even some government officials had profited from the system. Each revelation strengthened the case for systematic reform rather than individual prosecutions. Some traditional families attempted to adapt, proposing moderate fattening that wouldn't endanger health. They missed the fundamental point that our bodies weren't commodities to be shaped for sale. We rejected any compromise that continued treating girls as products rather than people. The resistance network evolved into a support system for survivors. We created safe houses for girls fleeing forced fattening, provided medical care for those suffering complications, and offered education for those whose schooling had been interrupted. Each girl we helped strengthened our movement. My grandmother made one final attempt to reassert control. She gathered her remaining supporters and declared that any girl who rejected tradition would be cast out from the family forever. No inheritance, no support, no recognition as daughters. She believed the threat of complete abandonment would break our resolve. Instead, it freed us. Girls who'd wavered, torn between resistance and family loyalty, found clarity in her ultimatum. If the choice was between our lives and their approval, we chose life. The declaration meant to divide us only unified our purpose. The health ministry's final report was damning. They documented systematic abuse, medical negligence, and preventable deaths across multiple districts. Their recommendations included criminal charges for the worst offenders and comprehensive reform of traditional practices that endangered health. As the legal proceedings began, we faced a new challenge. Some girls, broken by their experiences, struggled to testify. The trauma of forced feeding, isolation, and family rejection had left deep psychological scars. We supported each other through the difficult process, knowing our collective testimony would protect future generations. The traditional family's defense relied on cultural relativism, arguing outsiders couldn't judge practices they didn't understand. But we weren't outsiders. We were daughters who'd survived their tradition and found it wanting. Our voices carried weight that no external criticism could match. My grandmother's trial became a symbol of the larger conflict. She sat unmoved as girl after girl testified about their experiences. Only when the profit ledgers were presented, showing she'd calculated earnings from her own granddaughter's deaths, did her composure crack. The numbers revealed a cold business calculation behind claims of cultural preservation. How did Kala's mother find the strength to share her story after staying quiet for so long? The way those traditional mothers finally spoke up about their daughters dying makes me wonder what changed their minds after years of silence. But victory wasn't simple. Communities divided between those embracing change and those clinging to tradition. Some families found middle ground, abandoning forced fattening while maintaining other cultural practices. Others dug deeper into extremism, viewing any compromise as betrayal. We continued our work, knowing lasting change required more than legal victories. Education programs taught girls about nutrition and health. Economic initiatives provided alternatives to bride prices for family income. Medical clinics treated those still suffering from their time in fattening houses. The network we'd built for resistance transformed into a foundation for recovery. Girls who'd once shared techniques for fake weight gain now shared strategies for building new lives. We supported each other through family reconciliations, career development, and the slow process of healing. My relationship with my family remained complicated. My mother eventually acknowledged the harm she'd allowed, but trust would take years to rebuild. My father struggled to understand how tradition had become abuse. Only my younger cousins, seeing our strength and independence, fully embraced the changes we'd fought to create. The weeks following our release brought new challenges I hadn't anticipated. My grandmother's network ran deeper than we'd realized. Shop owners refused to sell to families who'd sided with us. Water deliveries stopped arriving at progressive households. Even the local clinic turned away girls seeking treatment for complications from their time in the fattening houses. My own family split down the middle. My mother attempted reconciliation through small gestures, leaving plates of food outside my door, mending clothes I'd torn during my imprisonment. My father remained distant, spending longer hours away from home, unable to face the reality of what they'd supported. The traditional families regrouped with alarming speed. They established new fattening houses in remote locations, recruiting girls from poorer communities where our message hadn't reached. We learned through whispered warnings that they'd modified their methods, using injectable hormones to accelerate weight gain while avoiding the visible signs of force feeding. Kayla's recovery progressed slowly. The damage to her joints required daily physical therapy sessions we conducted in secret, as the local medical facilities remained hostile. I watched her wince through exercises designed to restore mobility, each movement a reminder of what the tradition had stolen from her. Our resistance network adapted to these new circumstances. We organized underground support meetings in different locations each week, never gathering in the same place twice. Girls shared information about which families were still forcing daughters into fattening, which doctors would provide care without questions, which markets would sell to us. My grandmother's influence manifested in unexpected ways. Bank accounts belonging to progressive families experienced mysterious delays. School administrators suddenly discovered reasons to expel daughters who'd participated in the rebellion. Even simple tasks like obtaining official documents became bureaucratic nightmares designed to exhaust our resolve. 3 months after our release, Fatima disappeared. Her family claimed she'd gone to visit relatives in another district, but we recognized the pattern. Girls who maintained their testimony against the tradition vanished, only to resurface months later, broken and compliant. The The message was clear. Resistance carried consequences beyond official channels. I developed new strategies for protecting vulnerable girls. We created an early warning system using colored fabrics hung on laundry lines. Red meant immediate danger, yellow indicated suspicious family behavior, green signaled safety. The network expanded beyond our original group as mothers who'd lost daughters to the tradition quietly joined our cause. The economic pressure intensified. Families who'd relied on bride prices for income found themselves struggling without that revenue stream. Some wavered in their support, tempted by promises of restored prosperity if they returned to traditional ways. We countered by establishing small businesses that provided alternative income sources, teaching skills that didn't require selling daughters' bodies. My isolation within my own home became suffocating. Family meals turned into silent battles, each bite of food carrying the weight of our conflict. My younger cousins watched these dynamics with confusion, torn between loyalty to elders and admiration for our defiance. The house mothers who'd cooperated with investigators faced their own persecution. Former colleagues shunned them, their families disowned them, and mysterious accidents began befalling those who'd provided the most damaging testimony. We established safe houses in sympathetic households, rotating locations to prevent discovery. Salma's situation grew particularly precarious after her betrayal of my grandmother. The old woman's favorites became her greatest targets for retribution. Salma endured constant surveillance, her every movement tracked by family members determined to prevent further damage to their system. 6 months passed before we achieved our next breakthrough. A group of progressive fathers, silent until then, finally spoke out against the tradition. They'd watched their daughters suffer, their wives torn between culture and maternal instinct, and decided enough was enough. Their voices carried different weight than ours, forcing traditional patriarchs to engage with criticism from their own peers. The traditional families responded by tightening their control over remaining daughters. Girls as young as 10 were sent to remote fattening houses, beginning the process earlier to prevent exposure to our influence. We intercepted desperate messages from children barely old enough to understand what was happening to them. My relationship with my mother reached a turning point when she discovered evidence of my father's complicity in Fatima's disappearance. The confrontation that followed shattered our family's remaining facade of unity. She chose to protect me, revealing planned attempts to return me to fattening by force. We evacuated that night, fleeing to a safe house operated by Mariama's mother. The network had evolved into an underground railroad of sorts, moving girls between protective locations when threats emerged. Each journey required careful planning, coded communications, and trusted escorts. The investigation's official conclusions brought mixed results. While authorities acknowledged systematic abuse, they stopped short of banning the practice entirely. Instead, they issued guidelines for voluntary participation and health monitoring that traditional families immediately found ways to circumvent. Our response focused on education and prevention. We visited schools in secret, teaching younger girls about bodily autonomy and health risks. We distributed pamphlets disguised as traditional recipes that actually contained information about the dangers of rapid weight gain and forced feeding. The death books became our most powerful tool. We created copies, ensuring the names and weights of deceased girls spread throughout communities. Each entry represented a daughter, sister, or cousin whose life had been sacrificed for profit. The emotional impact proved more effective than any official report. My sister Kayla transformed into one of our most effective advocates. Her visible struggle with mobility, the daily pain she endured, provided undeniable evidence of the tradition's cruelty. She spoke at gatherings with quiet dignity, her labored breathing punctuating every word about her experience. The economic warfare continued from both sides. Traditional families leveraged their wealth to maintain influence, while we developed cooperative networks that bypassed their control. Girls learned trades that provided independence, skills that couldn't be taken away by family decree. A year after the initial confrontation, patterns had solidified. Communities remained divided between those embracing change and those clinging to tradition. Some families found uncomfortable middle ground, abandoning the most extreme practices while maintaining the underlying belief system that valued daughters primarily as commodities. My grandmother's health declined, though her influence remained strong. She directed operations from her bed, issuing orders through loyal lieutenants who maintained the fattening houses in defiance of public scrutiny. Her determination to preserve her legacy intensified as her physical strength waned. We established medical clinics staffed by sympathetic healthcare workers who treated girls without judgment. The documentation from these clinics built an undeniable record of the tradition's ongoing harm. Diabetes, heart disease, joint destruction, and psychological trauma filled page after page of medical files. The younger generation provided our greatest hope. Girls who'd witnessed our rebellion grew up questioning traditions their mothers had accepted without protest. They asked uncomfortable questions about bodily autonomy, about the value of health versus bride prices, about futures beyond marriage to men who paid by the pound. My father's eventual departure surprised no one. Unable to reconcile his beliefs with the evidence of harm, he chose exile over evolution. His absence created space for healing between my mother and me, though trust remained fragile as spider silk. The network's influence spread to neighboring districts where similar traditions existed. We shared our strategies, our successes and failures, building a broader coalition of resistance. Each community adapted our methods to their specific circumstances, creating diverse approaches to the same fundamental problem. 2 years after that pivotal wedding viewing, we achieved something remarkable. Fatima's sudden disappearance has me questioning the real power structure here. These traditional families seem to have connections that run much deeper than just cultural influence. The colored fabric warning system feels like something out of a spy novel, yet here these girls are. An entire extended family publicly renounced the fattening fattening tradition, acknowledging the harm it had caused across generations. The patriarch's speech, delivered at a community gathering, created ripples that reached even the most traditional households. But victories remained incomplete. For every family that abandoned the practice, others dug deeper into secrecy. Underground fattening houses operated beyond our reach, their locations known only to the most trusted insiders. We saved who we could while knowing others remained trapped. My role evolved from rebel to counselor. Girls sought guidance on escaping family pressure, on healing from their experiences, on building lives beyond the narrow paths tradition had carved for them. Each story reinforced why our work mattered, why we couldn't afford to stop. The death books expanded with new entries as the tradition claimed more victims in its hidden locations. We added these names to our record, ensuring their sacrifice wouldn't be forgotten. Each entry strengthened our resolve to prevent future additions to those terrible ledgers. As my 18th birthday approached, I faced my own crossroads. The network needed leaders who could navigate both traditional and progressive spaces. My experience, my survival, positioned me uniquely for this role. The choice meant accepting permanent separation from parts of my family still loyal to my grandmother's vision. The final confrontation came unexpectedly. My grandmother summoned me through intermediaries, claiming she wanted to make peace before her death. I arrived at her compound with witnesses, refusing to enter alone. What followed wasn't reconciliation, but her last attempt to break our movement. She'd gathered the remaining traditional families for what she called a restoration ceremony. Dozens of girls, some barely teenagers, sat in the courtyard being fed by house mothers. She intended to demonstrate that our rebellion had failed, that tradition would endure despite our efforts. Instead, her display backfired spectacularly. Several girls in the ceremony were secretly part of our network, planted there to gather intelligence. At a predetermined signal, they stood simultaneously, revealing the same fake fat suits we'd exposed years earlier. The ceremony collapsed into chaos as more girls rejected their bowls and joined the revelation. My grandmother's fury manifested in a physical collapse that required immediate medical attention. As they carried her away, I saw something shift in the watching crowd. The invincibility of tradition had cracked again, this time perhaps beyond repair. The aftermath moved swiftly. Families who'd witnessed the failed ceremony began questioning their commitment to a practice built on deception. The girls who'd revealed themselves became heroes to their peers, proof that resistance was possible even in tradition's strongholds. We capitalized on this momentum by establishing formal support structures. Education programs, job training, and medical care became systematized rather than underground. Progressive families pooled resources to create alternatives to the economic systems that had sustained the fattening tradition. My mother emerged as an unexpected ally in these efforts. Her journey from complicit participant to active opponent provided a model for other mothers struggling with similar transitions. She spoke honestly about her failures, her regrets, and her determination to protect future generations. The changes weren't universal or complete. Pockets of resistance to our resistance remained strong. Some communities modified rather than abandoned their practices, creating new forms of the same fundamental harm. Our work evolved to address these adaptations, staying ahead of those who would preserve profit over health. As I write this, 5 years have passed since that wedding viewing changed everything. The fattening houses still exist, but their power has diminished. Girls know they have options, that resistance is possible, that their bodies belong to them alone. The network we built continues growing, adapting, surviving. My sister Kyla still struggles with the physical consequences of her time in the fattening house. Her joints ache constantly, her breathing remains labored, but she continues speaking out. Her testimony has saved countless girls from similar fates. She found purpose in her pain, transformation in her truth. The death books remain our most powerful reminder of why this fight matters. We've created a memorial listing every name, every weight, every life lost to this tradition. It stands as testimony to the real cost of cultural practices that prioritize profit over people. My grandmother died last month, unrepentant to the end. Her funeral divided our community one final time between those mourning a cultural guardian and those relieved by a tyrant's passing. I attended, standing with the girls she'd tried to destroy, our presence a final act of defiance against her legacy. The work continues daily. We monitor vulnerable families, provide support to girls at risk, document ongoing abuses, and celebrate each small victory. Change happens slowly, incrementally, through individual choices and collective action. Every girl who walks free instead of being wheeled out represents progress. My own path led to establishing a formal organization dedicated to ending harmful cultural practices. We work within communities, respecting cultural identity while challenging specific traditions that cause harm. It's delicate work, requiring patience, wisdom, and unwavering commitment to protecting vulnerable girls. The economic systems that sustain the fattening tradition have slowly transformed. Families find new sources of income and pride. Daughters are valued for their minds, their skills, their contributions beyond their weight. It's imperfect progress, but progress nonetheless. Looking forward, I see both challenges and hope. New generations grow up questioning what previous ones accepted. The network we built from desperate rebellion has evolved into sustainable change. The fattening houses that once seemed invincible now operate in shadows, their power diminished though not eliminated. We've learned that changing culture requires more than exposing harm. It demands creating alternatives, supporting those who choose change, and accepting that progress comes in waves rather than floods. Every girl saved, every family transformed, every tradition questioned, brings us closer to a world where daughters are treasured for who they are, not what they weigh. The scars remain, physical and emotional, across our community. But scars tell stories of survival, of resistance, of change. We wear ours as reminders of where we've been and markers of where we're going. The work isn't finished, may never be completely finished, but we we continue forward, one girl, one family, one tradition at a time. Thanks for letting me toss in my 2 cents along the way. Definitely twice as fun with you along for the ride. Catch you next story. If you made it to the end, drop a comment. I love reading all your comments.